Hello everyone, and welcome back to a late holiday special. So, have any of you heard of a show called Adam Ruins Everything? It originally started as a series of YouTube videos on college humor where Adam would criticize various systems and practices in everyday life, such as sex, and the topic of this video, tipping your servers, or as the video is called, why tipping should be banned. It's also important to note that Adam Ruins Everything got a TV show on True TV, and that the skits in this video were remade and reworked into an episode called Adam Ruins Restaurants, which basically made the same points here with clearer wording and less profanity.
How much should we tip?
In a perfect world, nothing.
Shit! How much should I tip?
In a perfect world, nothing.
I know that may seem innocuous to bring up, but trust me, this will be important later. Anyway, on August 10th, 2017, a political commentator called Just a Robot made a commentary on Adam's Why Tipping Should Be Banned video. And on December 10th of this year, a kid YouTuber called Violin made a commentary on that, and I felt it had a fair amount of issues. Now, before we get started, I want to clarify that I'm not trying to discourage Violin from making videos, nor am I trying to berate or belittle her. I do feel that she has potential to make good commentaries, and there were some decent points here. I'm just here to point out problems and offer her some advice. Now anyways, let's get started.
So, context on this bad boy. Adam Conover is a comedian and host of the comedy TV show Adam Ruins Everything. The show consists of him destroying several facts you might know about certain topics. The topic that our Layer 1 will be commentating on is about tipping. Our Layer 1 is Just a Robot, or Jar as I'll be calling him, famous anti-feminist YouTuber, and one of my personal least favorite YouTubers ever. I'm not gonna let that bother me.
Okay, first off, keep this intro statement in mind, it will be relevant shortly. Secondly, it's really hard to hear what you're saying. Not only are you quiet, but you tend to talk quickly and mumble a lot, and that makes it really hard to understand your points. This is a consistent problem throughout the video, so I'll be adding subtitles so you can hear what she's saying.
And right now, you probably hate me for even daring to question the custom of tipping.
Yeah, what the fudge?
This is put on college humor, right? You really can't say fuck. You have to replace it with the word fudge. At least say the word hell instead.
I believe it's because it's an educational video, and one of the more kid-friendly shows on College Humor. If the clip was taken from the actual episode, which was very close to being, it was because the show was TV-14. Possibly due to how close this clip was from the start of the show, it could have been a test run of a future topic, which it was, and they make a joke about censoring cuss words in the show.
Okay, there's a lot to go over here. First off, you really needed to give some more context here, because as somebody who doesn't watch Adam Ruins Everything, I was originally under the impression that the TV version of this show was just the College Humor YouTube videos that got censored when they were put on the air. But after I went and watched the videos you're referring to, it turns out that they actually remade the skits from the ground up with the same points and less profanity. This was something that I didn't get from your video going in, and it caused your statement to be very confusing for me. You shouldn't assume that everyone in your audience has watched the TV version of this show since, well, not everyone has, so the people who haven't watched it are going to be lost here. Secondly, you're not going to provide proof for your claims here, you're not going to show a clip of the staff making fun of how they censor cuss words, not even going to name an episode that does this, because as is, all we have to go on here is your word, which really isn't a good tactic to use in a debate. Since for all we know, you could be taking something out of context, and if you want to argue that your audience can go look for the information themselves, that's not a good excuse, because if you have to ask your audience to go and fact-check your claims for you, then you're giving them reasons to doubt your claim. Which, well, that's probably not something you want, since I'm assuming you're doing this with the purpose of trying to convince your audience that your argument is correct. This also applies to your other points as well. You're saying that it's possible that the waitress saying, "What the fudge," was used as a test run for a future episode, and that's the reason why it was censored. But you don't tell us what episode this was used in, which would cause your audience to have to go out of their way to find what episode you're talking about just to fact-check your claim. And even then, your point has no concrete proof behind it. Sure, it's possible that the waitress saying "what the fudge" was meant to be practice for the TV show, but it's also possible that this wasn't the case at all. You aren't doing anything to prove that this was actually the case here. You're just saying that it's possible and expecting us to believe that, when you could be entirely wrong on this. This is a rather flimsy argument since you don't have any definitive evidence to back it up. But even if this was the case, that wouldn't change how none of this debunks Jar's point, because just because there's a reason for something, that doesn't mean Jar has to like it. May I remind you, this video was published on College Humor's YouTube channel, the same channel that had Gilbert Gottfried read 50 Shades of Grey out loud for a joke.
Holy fuck, is this wrong? But holy hell, is it erotic?
Even in this video, there are times where the people cuss.
You're an asshole!
Fuck! This is just the SATs all over again!
Well, then fuck it.
So whether or not the waitress saying fudge was meant to be a test run for the TV show or not, it's still rather jarring and inconsistent with not only this video, but College Humor's other videos as well. And that's something Jar clearly doesn't appreciate, which is also something Jar complains about a little bit later.
Also, you can use the word asshole, but you can't use the word fuck? What the fudge?
Also, this clip wasn't in your video, and you don't use a skip card or anything to inform your audience that you cut this part out. If you're going to cut stuff out of your video, you should at least give some indication that you're going to be skipping stuff, because as is, it looks like you're cutting out context.
First, ask yourself this. Why is it our responsibility to pay the restaurant's employees humanely?
Well, the thing is, it's not our responsibility. No one really has to do it. People just do it to be generous.
You're missing the point. Why is it our responsibility? Then it's not really our responsibility. We do it to be generous. Except when you think about it, all the money for the food goes to the people at the top, and servers barely get anything from that. They only get tips, which means it is our responsibility to give us money. It is only on us to do that.
And now we're getting into another reoccurring problem with your video, your wording. It's our responsibility to give us money? I thought Adam said it was our responsibility to give the servers money. I don't think he was telling us to give money to ourselves. Yeah, I get what you were trying to say here. Adam's saying that society is pressuring us to tip because the server's livelihood depends on it, and I even agree with you that Jar is missing Adam's point. But the way you worded this could have been better here. Some may say I'm nitpicking, but this is still an issue that affects how Violin's point is presented, and little problems like this add up, and it's going to be a much more apparent issue later on.
The fact is, tipping is a relatively new custom in America. For most of our history, paying for better service was considered an undemocratic form of bribery.
Serve me before this rabble, will you? I'm a very wealthy man.
I shan't, sir. This is America, where every man has the right to decent service.
But not the right to spend their money how they please.
Spend their money how they please? You do know you're saying, yes, we deserve our choice to treat our servers like they're not a human person, like me.
That's quite the straw man you built there, but it's a shame that isn't what Jar's trying to say. If you paid attention to the rest of Jar's video, he made it clear that he feels that servers should get paid decently, but that people should still have the option to give servers extra cash if they want to.
I somewhat agree with that. I do think waiters should at least get minimum wage. Now granted, most waiters I know do make more than minimum wage with all the tips they earn. But then again, there are some waiters who totally get bullshit pay.
So no, he's not saying that people have the right to pay servers like garbage, he's saying that people should have the right to give servers extra money if they want to. All you're doing is taking Jar out of context.
You know, it really confuses me that people describe Adam as a very libertarian man.
Adam Ruins Everything is a show. I've actually really liked Adam Ruins Everything on quite a few things. I've taken some sort of, I guess, libertarian stances, but generally speaking, it's pretty informative.
But not being able to spend your money how you want to sounds like the least libertarian thing ever.
You're forcing Adam into this box that says he is this point of view, no matter what, based off of what a climate change denier says, by the way. The show is centrist, as ruins all sides. I'd say Adam's a leftist, judging by his Twitter, but he gets to say that. Not you and a freaking climate change denier.
Oh, joy to the world. Now we're throwing out ad hominems to try and discredit Jar's points. Hooray! Like, seriously? Don't do this. Jar's stance on climate change has nothing to do with his point about how Adam doesn't come off as a libertarian. You are literally trying to use his political ideology to discredit his point here when that's completely irrelevant to this conversation, and that's flat out dishonest on your end. Mind you, I agree that climate change is real, but don't bring up Jar's thoughts on it as if that invalidates his points here. I don't even disagree with your point, though some examples of Adam reviewing both sides would be nice, but I'd appreciate it if you didn't try to poison the well. I thought I was missing something about that point. So credit to Duel Taku for pointing this out to me, but apparently Violin wasn't calling Jar a climate change denier here. She was saying that this guy, the example Jar brought up, didn't believe in climate change. Now, either way, this doesn't debunk my point, since whether or not the guy in Jar's clip believes in climate change, that still has nothing to do with this conversation. And bringing it up like this is still an ad hominem attack, since it comes off like she's using this to discredit that guy's opinions. I just wanted to clarify a little detail that I missed. Sorry about that. Also, if I could cover Jar's point real quick, you say that people describe Adam as being very libertarian, yet the guy in that clip only said he took some libertarian stances, which implies that Adam occasionally shows libertarian ideals, but overall he doesn't. So this looks like you're overblowing your claim here.
And also, you want to ban a rich man from giving a poor man money because he gives good service? There are plenty of cases where a celebrity has tipped a lot of money, but you want to ban that. In other words, you don't want the upper class helping the lower class. So you're also anti-socialist. And here's the real kicker. If we do ban tipping, what's going to be the punishment if people do tip? Are they going to be arrested? Are they going to be fined?
Oh boy, there's a lot to unpack here. First, I'd say that banning tipping isn't exactly what Adam means. I assume he's just removing the idea of tipping for everyone, raising prices, and letting servers always get money. You can tip, and that'd be pretty cool. Tipping isn't illegal, it's just not needed. Servers are now equal.
So, are we going to ignore that the video is literally called Why Tipping Should Be Banned, which gives a very strong implication that tipping shouldn't be legal? Even if you want to argue that the title is misleading, which even then wouldn't excuse anything, since that would still make Adam's overall point confusing and unclear but details, are you going to show some points in Adam's video where he isn't saying we should outright ban tipping? Because not only are you refusing to back up your claim with evidence from the video, but I can point out several times in his video where he either implies or flat out says that tipping is a bad custom that we'd be better off without.
How much should we tip?
In a perfect world, nothing.
Shit!
By the end of this video, I think you'll agree that tipping is a custom we'd be better off without. And tipping is a custom that shortchanges servers, inconveniences customers, and makes the dining experience worse for everyone.
Why don't they just pay you a normal amount of money and make the food more expensive? I mean, that's what every business has done since the dawn of time. In most cultures, nobody tips, and everyone still gets their food on time. The only difference is their waiters get a steady income, and no one has to argue about the bill.
Even if by the off chance Adam wasn't trying to say that tipping should be banned, it seriously doesn't come across that way, so you can't really blame Jar for coming to this conclusion when Adam's argument is this misleading.
But after Prohibition banned the sale of alcohol, restaurant profits cratered, and owners began encouraging tipping just so they could pay their servers less.
Oh, sorry, Allie. I'm not going to be able to pay you this month. You better take some of that fat cat's cash.
Wait a second, you just said their profits were plummeting. Did they really tell their waiters to ask for tips just because they didn't want to pay them? Or was it because they couldn't afford to pay them?
I believe Adam's point here was that they started needing tips like this in plummeting markets, yet they keep on doing it, which is what Adam says immediately after.
Nearly a century later, restaurant owners still pay their servers less than minimum wage, turning what used to be a bribe into an obligation that makes the end of every meal suck.
You're missing Jar's point here. He doesn't have a problem with Adam's overall argument. What he does have a problem with is Adam implying that restaurant owners didn't always pay their employees during Prohibition times just so they could pay their servers less.
Restaurant profits cratered, and owners began encouraging tipping just so they could pay their servers less.
Not because, you know, they couldn't afford to because they lost a good chunk of their revenue due to the ban on alcohol. Not only does Adam's wording imply this, but the skit itself also gives off this implication, since it shows the owner as a guy with a suit and a large stack of cash in his hand, refusing to pay the server and asking him to take the customer's money. Yeah, that's a lot of money you got there for someone whose business is barely getting by. And if you want to argue that this was just done for comedic hyperbole, that's no excuse. It's still an inaccurate and misleading depiction of what was happening during that time period, so whether or not this was done for comedic purposes or not, Adam's implication here is still misleading. Which is a problem since this is supposed to be an educational show, so when the skits are giving off a misleading representation of something, then they're essentially giving out false information.
Nearly a century later, restaurant owners still pay their servers less than minimum wage, turning what used to be a bribe into an obligation that makes the end of every meal suck.
And I somewhat agree with that. I do think waiters should at least get minimum wage. Now granted, most waiters I know do make more than minimum wage with all the tips they earn. But then again, there are some waiters who totally get bullshit pay.
Wait, then why are you saying tipping should stay? It's basically giving you the option to give servers quote-unquote bullshit pay. You're saying that sucked for the servers, but you're still advocating for the choice to do that.
That's not what Jar is saying, please pay attention to his point. Jar is saying that servers should get minimum wage so that they don't have to rely on tips to get by, but we should still be allowed to give them a tip as well. Adam's original argument was that tipping is bad because it seems an excuse to pay servers less than minimum wage. However, Jar is saying that if servers have minimum wage and they're allowed to get tips, then if someone decides not to tip the server who's getting paid minimum wage, then going by the logic that Adam presented, the server isn't getting screwed over, since they're still making a decent wage. Jar isn't advocating for the option to give servers awful pay. He's saying that they should get paid decently, but we should also be allowed to give them extra money if we want to.
However, saying tipping ruins the end of every meal is complete and utter bullshit. Let me give you an example of why tipping can be good.
Like if I'm eating out and my bill came to £48 and 31 pence, I'll just leave £50 on the table. Or more realistically, I'd pretend like I forgot my wallet at home and I'd hope my friend leaves £50 on the table. But again, the tipping's more of a convenience. Like fuck the 169 change, do you know what I mean?
But you want to ban that, don't you?
Okay, if I can tackle Jar's, or rather Grade A's point real quick, even if a place doesn't allow tips, the customer doesn't have to wait around for their change. Even if tipping wasn't allowed in restaurants, the scenario Grade A brought up would still be possible. The only difference is that the change wouldn't go to the server, it would just be kept separately from the bill.
Well, think about this. Now you're always going to pay that £50, no matter what. It's an easier convenience and you have no problems with rounding. And a lot of people, including my own family, still do the math for a 10 to 20% tip, trying to be exact. Then arguments start on how much to tip, math is difficult, and the whole is tipping good argument said here begins. It's generally a mess.
Okay, two things here. First off, the way you worded your first point is confusing. I'm assuming that you're trying to say if the restaurant raised the price from $48.31 to $50 exactly, then the customer wouldn't have to worry about rounding. But if that is what you're trying to say, then A, your wording didn't make that clear at all, since you don't mention anything about the restaurant changing their prices within your point here, so it's just confusing, and B, your point assumes that the restaurants would change their price to $50 exactly, when they could just as well change it to $50.69 or something like that. Again, your point relies too much on hypothetical and doesn't debunk anything. And if this isn't what you're trying to say, then I have no idea what your point was supposed to be here. Now for your second point. Just because other people want to do the math for the tip and be exact with their change, that doesn't mean that everyone will. There are still people who don't like doing that and just want to have the waiters take the change, and since Adam specifically said that tipping ruins the end of the night for everyone, Jar's point still stands, since it wouldn't be ruining the night for people who don't want to do the math and overpay. Well, his point would stand if I didn't debunk it earlier. Anyways, after this, Violin makes a point I agree with and then goes into her final thoughts, so I might as well go into mine. As I said earlier, I've certainly seen worse commentaries by kids. There were some decent points in here, and I do think you have potential, but you also have some issues that I feel that you need to work out. First off, you need to enunciate more and speak at a slower pace, since it was really hard to understand what you were saying throughout the video. I'd also recommend working on your wording so that it's easier to understand, since some of your points were unclear. Secondly, try not to let your bias get in the way of your points. There's nothing wrong with commentating on someone that you dislike, but you shouldn't bring up their personal beliefs of your target when it doesn't relate to their points, because at that point you're using irrelevant information to try and debunk their argument. Thirdly, try and bring up evidence to support your claim, since without it, your audience has no reason to believe you. And finally, try to pay attention to your target's points. This was a consistent issue throughout your video, where you ended up strawmanning Jar's argument. You made it sound like he was fine with people snubbing underpaid waiters, when if you looked at the full context of the video, he was actually saying waiters should get minimum wage, but that customers should also be allowed to tip. And that's all I have to say. I hope you all enjoyed the video, and have a happy new year.